I have just received a surprising piece of news. I have just met our chambermaid on the stairs and been informed by her that Maria Filipovna departed today by the night train to stay with a cousin at Carlsbad. What can that mean? The maid declares that Madame packed her trunks early in the day, yet how is it that no one else seems to have been aware of the circumstance? Or is it that I have been the only person to be unaware of it? Also, the maid has just told me that 3 days ago Maria Filipovna had some high words with the general. I understand then. Probably the words were concerning Mademoiselle Blanche. Certainly something decisive is approaching. Yeram. In the morning I sent for the maître d'hôtel and explained to him that, in future, my bill was to be rendered to me personally. As a matter of fact, my expenses had never been so large as to alarm me, nor to lead me to quit the hotel, while, moreover, I still had 160 gulden left to me, and, in them, yes, in them, perhaps, riches awaited me. It was a curious fact that though I had not yet won anything at play, I nevertheless acted, thought, and felt as though I were sure, before long, to become wealthy, since I could not imagine myself otherwise. Next, I bethought me, despite the earliness of the hour, of going to see Mr. Astley, who was staying at the Hôtel de l'Angleterre, a hostelry at no great distance from our own. But suddenly, de Griers entered my room. This had never before happened, for of late that gentleman and I had stood on the most strained and distant of terms, he attempting no concealment of his contempt for me. He even made an express point of showing it, and I having no reason to desire his company. In short, I detested him. Consequently, his entry at the present moment the more astounded me. At once I divined that something out of the way was on the carpet. He entered with marked affability and began by complimenting me on my room. Then, perceiving that I had my hat in my hands, he inquired whither I was going so early, and no sooner did he hear that I was bound for Mr. Astley's than he stopped, looked grave, and seemed plunged in thought. He was a true Frenchman, insofar as that, though he could be lively and engaging when it suited him, he became insufferably dull and wearisome as soon as ever the need for being lively and engaging had passed. Seldom is a Frenchman naturally civil. He is civil only as though to order and of set purpose. Also, if he thinks it incumbent upon him to be fanciful, original, and out of the way, his fancy always assumes a foolish, unnatural vein, for the reason that it is compounded of trite, hackneyed forms. In short, the natural Frenchman is a conglomeration of commonplace, petty, everyday positiveness, so that he is the most tedious person in the world. Indeed, I believe that none but greenhorns and excessively Russian people feel an attraction towards the French. For to any man of sensibility, such a compendium of outworn forms, a compendium which is built up of drawing-room manners, expansiveness, and gaiety, becomes at once over-noticeable and unbearable. "I have come to see you on business," de Griers began in a very off-hand, yet polite tone. "Nor will I seek to conceal from you the fact that I have come in the capacity of an emissary, of an intermediary, from the general. Having small knowledge of the Russian tongue, I lost most of what was said last night. But the general has now explained matters, and I must confess that—" "See here, Monsieur de Griers," I interrupted. "I understand that you have undertaken to act in this affair as an intermediary. Of course, I am only an utchitel, a tutor, and have never claimed to be an intimate of this household, nor to stand on at all familiar terms with it. Consequently, I do not know the whole of its circumstances. Yet pray explain to me this. Have you yourself become one of its members, seeing that you are beginning to take such a part in everything, and are now present as an intermediary?" The Frenchman seemed not overpleased at my question. It was one which was too outspoken for his taste, and he had no mind to be frank with me. "I am connected with the general," he said dryly, "partly through business affairs, and partly through special circumstances. My principal has sent me merely to ask you to forego your intentions of last evening. What you contemplate is, I have no doubt, very clever. Yet he has charged me to represent to you that you have not the slightest chance of succeeding in your end, since not only will the Baron refuse to receive you, but also he, the Baron, has at his disposal every possible means for obviating further unpleasantness from you. Surely you can see that yourself. What then would be the good of going on with it all? On the other hand, the general promises that at the first favorable opportunity he will receive you back into his household and, in the meantime, will credit you with your salary, with vos appointments. Surely that will suit you, will it not? Very quietly I replied that he, the Frenchman, was laboring under a delusion, that perhaps, after all, I should not be expelled from the Baron's presence, but, on the contrary, be listened to. Finally, that I should be glad if Monsieur de Griers would confess that he was now visiting me merely in order to see how far I intended to go in the affair. "Good heavens!" cried de Griers. "Seeing that the general takes such an interest in the matter, is there anything very unnatural in his desiring also to know your plans?" Again I began my explanations, but the Frenchman only fidgeted and rolled his head about as he listened with an expression of manifest and unconcealed irony on his face. In short, he adopted a supercilious attitude. For my own part, I endeavored to pretend that I took the affair very seriously. I declared that, since the Baron had gone and complained of me to the general as though I were a mere servant of the general's, he had, in the first place, lost me my post, and in the second place, treated me like a person to whom, as to one not qualified to answer for himself, it was not even worth while to speak. Naturally, I said, I felt insulted at this. Yet, comprehending as I did differences of years, of social status, and so forth, here I could scarcely help smiling. I was not anxious to bring about further scenes by going personally to demand or to request satisfaction of the Baron. All that I felt was that I had a right to go in person and beg the Baron's and the Baroness's pardon, the more so since, of late, I had been feeling unwell and unstrung and had been in a fanciful condition. And so forth, and so forth. Yet, I continued, the Baron's offensive behaviour to me of yesterday, that is to say, the fact of his referring the matter to the General, as well as his insistence that the General should deprive me of my post, had placed me in such a position that I could not well express my regret to him, the Baron, and to his good lady, for the reason that in all probability both he and the Baroness, with the world at large, would imagine that I was doing so merely because I hoped, by my action, to recover my post. Hence, I found myself forced to request the Baron to express to me his own regrets, as well as to express them in the most unqualified manner, to say, in fact, that he had never had any wish to insult me. After the Baron had done that, I should, for my part, at once feel free to express to him, wholeheartedly and without reserve, my own regrets. In short, I declared in conclusion, my one desire is that the Baron may make it possible for me to adopt the latter course. "Oh, fie! What refinements and subtleties!" exclaimed de Griers. "Besides, what have you to express regret for? Confess, monsieur, pardon me, but I have forgotten your name. Confess, I say, that all this is merely a plan to annoy the General? Or perhaps you have some other and special end in view, eh? In return, you must pardon me, mon cher Marquis, and tell me what you have to do with it." "The General! But what of the General? Last night he said that, for some reason or another, it behoved him to move with especial care at present, wherefore he was feeling nervous. But I did not understand the reference." "Yes, there do exist special reasons for his doing so," assented de Griers in a conciliatory tone, yet with rising anger. "You are acquainted with Mademoiselle de Comminges, are you not?" "Mademoiselle? Blanche, you mean?" "Yes, mademoiselle. Blanche de Comminges. Doubtless you know also that the General is in love with this young lady, and may even be about to marry her before he leaves here. Imagine, therefore, what any scene or scandal would entail upon him. I cannot see that the marriage scheme need be affected by scenes or scandals." "Mais le baron est si irascible, un caractère prussien, vous savez. Enfin, il fera une querelle d'Allemands." "I do not care," I replied, seeing that I no longer belonged to his household. Of set purpose, I was trying to talk as senselessly as possible. "But is it quite settled that mademoiselle is to marry the General? What are they waiting for? Why should they conceal such a matter? At all events from ourselves, the general's own party. I cannot tell you. The marriage is not yet a settled affair, for they are awaiting news from Russia. The general has business transactions to arrange. Ah, connected, doubtless, with Madame his mother. De Griers shot at me a glance of hatred. To cut things short, he interrupted, I have complete confidence in your native politeness, as well as in your tact and good sense. I feel sure that you will do what I suggest, even if it is only for the sake of this family which has received you as a kinsman into its bosom and has always loved and respected you. Be so good as to observe, I remarked, that the same family has just expelled me from its bosom. All that you are saying but for show. But when people have just said to you, of course we do not wish to turn you out, yet, for the sake of appearances, you must permit yourself to be turned out. Nothing can matter very much. Very well, then, he said, in a sterner and more arrogant tone. Seeing that my solicitations have had no effect upon you, it is my duty to mention that other measures will be taken. There exist here police, you must remember, and this very day they shall send you packing. Que diable! To think of a blanc-bec like yourself challenging a person like the Baron to a duel. Do you suppose that you will be allowed to do such things? Just try doing them and see if anyone will be afraid of you. The reason why I have asked you to desist is that I can see that your conduct is causing the general annoyance. Do you believe that the Baron could not tell his lackey simply to put you out of doors? Nevertheless, I should not go out of doors, I retorted with absolute calm. You are laboring under a delusion, Monsieur de Griers. The thing will be done in far better trim than you imagine. I was just about to start for Mr. Astley's to ask him to be my intermediary, in other words, my second. He has a strong liking for me, and I do not think that he will refuse. He will go and see the Baron on my behalf, and the Baron will certainly not decline to receive him. Although I am only a tutor, a kind of subaltern, Mr. Astley is known to all men as the nephew of a real English lord, the Lord Pibroch, as well as a lord in his own right. Yes, you may be pretty sure that the Baron will be civil to Mr. Astley and listen to him. Or, should he decline to do so, Mr. Astley will take the refusal as a personal affront to himself, for you know how persistent the English are, and thereupon introduce to the Baron a friend of his own, and he has many friends in a good position. That being so, picture to yourself the issue of the affair, an affair which will not quite end as you think it will. This caused the Frenchman to bethink him of playing the coward. Really, things may be as this fellow says, he evidently thought. Really, he might be able to engineer another scene. Once more, I beg of you to let the matter drop, he continued in a tone that was now entirely conciliatory. One would think that it actually pleased you to have scenes. Indeed, it is a brawl rather than genuine satisfaction that you are seeking. I have said that the affair may prove to be diverting and even clever, and that possibly you may attain something by it. Yet, none the less, I tell you. He said this only because he saw me rise and reach for my hat, that I have come hither also to hand you these few words from a certain person. Read them, please, for I must take her back an answer. So saying, he took from his pocket a small, compact, wafer-sealed note and handed it to me. In Paulina's handwriting, I read, I hear that you are thinking of going on with this affair. You have lost your temper now and are beginning to play the fool. Certain circumstances, however, I may explain to you later. Pray cease from your folly and put a check upon yourself. For folly it all is. I have need of you, and moreover, you have promised to obey me. Remember the Schlangenberg. I ask you to be obedient. If necessary, I shall even bid you be obedient. Your own. Paulina. P.S. If so be that you still bear a grudge against me for what happened last night, pray forgive me. Everything, to my eyes, seemed to change as I read these words. My lips grew pale, and I began to tremble. Meanwhile, the cursed Frenchman was eyeing me discreetly and askance, as though he wished to avoid witnessing my confusion. It would have been better if he had laughed outright. Very well, I said. You can tell Mademoiselle not to disturb herself. But, I added sharply, I would also ask you why you have been so long in handing me this note. Instead of chattering about trifles, you ought to have delivered me the missive at once, if you have really come commissioned, as you say. Well, pardon some natural haste on my part, for the situation is so strange. I wished first to gain some personal knowledge of your intentions, and, moreover, I did not know the contents of the note, and thought that it could be given you at any time. I understand, I replied. So you were ordered to hand me the note only in the last resort, and if you could not otherwise appease me. Is it not so? Speak out, Monsieur de Griers. Perhaps, said he, assuming a look of great forbearance, but gazing at me in a meaning way. I reached for my hat, whereupon he nodded and went out. Yet on his lips I fancied that I could see a mocking smile. How could it have been otherwise? You and I are to have a reckoning later, Master Frenchman, I muttered as I descended the stairs. Yes, we will measure our strength together. Yet my thoughts were all in confusion, for again something seemed to have struck me dizzy. Presently the air revived me a little, and, a couple of minutes later, my brain had sufficiently cleared to enable two ideas in particular to stand out in it. Firstly, I asked myself which of the absurd, boyish, and extravagant threats which I had uttered at random last night had made everybody so alarmed. Secondly, what was the influence which this Frenchman appeared to exercise over Paulina? He had but to give the word, and at once she did as he desired. At once she wrote me a note to beg of me to forbear. Of course, the relations between the pair had, from the first, been a riddle to me. They had been so ever since I had first made their acquaintance. But of late I had remarked in her a strong aversion for, even a contempt for, him, while, for his part, he had scarcely even looked at her, but had behaved towards her always in the most churlish fashion. Yes, I had noted that. Also, Paulina herself had mentioned to me her dislike for him, and delivered herself of some remarkable confessions on the subject. Hence, he must have got her into his power somehow. Somehow he must be holding her as in a vice. Yettavde. All at once, on the promenade, as it was called, that is to say, in the Chestnut Avenue, I came face to face with my Englishman. I was just coming to see you, he said, and you appear to be out on a similar errand, so you have parted with your employers. How do you know that? I asked in astonishment. Is everyone aware of the fact? By no means. Not everyone would consider such a fact to be of moment. Indeed, I have never heard anyone speak of it. Then how come you to know it? Because I have had occasion to do so. Whither are you bound? I like you, and was therefore coming to pay you a visit. What a splendid fellow you are, Mr. Astley, I cried, though still wondering how he had come by his knowledge. And since I have not yet had my coffee, and you have, in all probability, scarcely tasted yours, let us adjourn to the Casino Café, where we can sit and smoke and have a talk. The café in question was only 100 paces away, so, when coffee had been brought, we seated ourselves, and I lit a cigarette. Astley was no smoker, but taking a seat by my side, he prepared himself to listen. I do not intend to go away, was my first remark. I intend, on the contrary, to remain here. That I never doubted, he answered good-humouredly. It is a curious fact that, on my way to see him, I had never even thought of telling him of my love for Paulina. In fact, I had purposely meant to avoid any mention of the subject. Nor, during our stay in the place, had I ever made aught but the scantiest reference to it. You see, not only was Astley a man of great reserve, but also from the first I had perceived that Paulina had made a great impression upon him, although he never spoke of her. But now, strangely enough, he had no sooner seated himself and bent his steely gaze upon me than, for some reason or another, I felt moved to tell him everything, to speak to him of my love in all its phases. For an hour and a half did I discourse on the subject, and found it a pleasure to do so, even though this was the first occasion on which I had referred to the matter. Indeed, when, at certain moments, I perceived that my more ardent passages confused him, I purposely increased my ardour of narration. Yet one thing I regret, and that is that I made references to the Frenchman which were a little over-personal. Mr. Astley sat without moving as he listened to me. Not a word nor a sound of any kind did he utter as he stared into my eyes. Suddenly, however, on my mentioning the Frenchman, he interrupted me and inquired sternly whether I did right to speak of an extraneous matter. He had always been a strange man in his mode of propounding questions. "No, I fear not," I replied. "And concerning this Marquis and Mademoiselle Paulina, you know nothing beyond surmise." Again I was surprised that such a categorical question should come from such a reserved individual. "No, I know nothing for certain about them," was my reply. "No, nothing." "Then you have done very wrong to speak of them to me, or even to imagine things about them." Quite so," I interrupted in some astonishment. "I admit that. Yet that is not the question." Whereupon I related to him in detail the incident of 2 days ago. I spoke of Paulina's outburst, of my encounter with the Baron, of my dismissal, of the General's extraordinary pusillanimity, and of the call which de Griers had that morning paid me. In conclusion, I showed Astley the note which I had lately received. "What do you make of it?" I asked. "When I met you, I was just coming to ask you your opinion. For myself, I could have killed this Frenchman, and am not sure that I shall not do so even yet." "I feel the same about it," said Mr. Astley. "As for Mademoiselle Paulina, well, you yourself know that, if necessity drives, one enters into relation with people whom one simply detests. Even between this couple there may be something which, though unknown to you, depends upon extraneous circumstances. For my own part, I think that you may reassure yourself, or, at all events, partially. And as for Mademoiselle Paulina's proceedings of 2 days ago, they were, of course, strange, not because she can have meant to get rid of you, or to earn for you a thrashing from the Baron's cudgel, which for some curious reason he did not use, although he had it ready in his hands, but because such proceedings on the part of of such a refined lady as Mademoiselle Paulina are, to say the least of it, unbecoming. But she cannot have guessed that you would carry out her absurd wish to the letter. Do you know what?" suddenly I cried, as I fixed Mr. Astley with my gaze. "I believe that you have already heard the story from someone, very possibly from Mademoiselle Paulina herself?" In return he gave me an astonished stare. "Your eyes look very fiery," he said with a return of his former calm, "and in them I can read suspicion. Now, you have no right whatever to be suspicious. It is not a right which I can for a moment recognize, and I absolutely refuse to answer your questions." "Enough! You need say no more," I cried with a strange emotion at my heart, yet not altogether understanding what had aroused that emotion in my breast. Indeed, when, where, and how could Paulina have chosen Astley to be one of her confidants? Of late, I had come rather to overlook him in this connection, even though Paulina had always been a riddle to me, so much so that now, when I had just permitted myself to tell my friend of my infatuation in all its aspects, I had found myself struck, during the very telling, with the fact that in my relations with her I could specify nothing that was explicit, nothing that was positive. On the contrary, my relations had been purely fantastic, strange, and unreal. They had been unlike anything else that I could think of. Very well," I replied, with a warmth equal to Astley's own. "Then I stand confounded, and have no further opinions to offer. But you are a good fellow, and I am glad to know what you think about it all, even though I do not need your advice." Then, after a pause, I resumed. "For instance, what reason should you assign for the General taking fright in this way? Why should my stupid clowning have led the world to elevate it into a serious incident? Even de Griers has found it necessary to put in his oar, and he only interferes on the most important occasions, and to visit me, and to address to me the most earnest supplications. Yes, he, de Griers, has actually been playing the suppliant to me. And mark you, although he came to me as early as 9 o'clock, he had ready prepared in his hand Mademoiselle Paulina's note. When, I would ask, was that note written? Mademoiselle Paulina must have been aroused from sleep for the express purpose of writing it. At all events, the circumstance shows that she is an absolute slave to the Frenchman, since she actually begs my pardon in the note. actually begs my pardon. Yet what is her personal concern in the matter? Why is she interested in it at all? Why, too, is the whole party so afraid of this precious baron? And what sort of a business do you call it for the general to be going to marry Mademoiselle Blanche de Comminges? He told me last night that because of the circumstance, he must move with especial care at present. What is your opinion of it all? Your look convinces me that you know more about it than I do. Mr. Astley smiled and nodded. Yes, I think I do know more about it than you do, he assented. The affair centres around this Mademoiselle Blanche. Of that I feel certain. And what of Mademoiselle Blanche? I cried impatiently, for in me there had dawned a sudden hope that this would enable me to discover something about Paulina. Well, my belief is that at the present moment Mademoiselle Blanche has, in very truth, a special reason for wishing to avoid any trouble with the Baron and the Baroness. It might lead not only to some unpleasantness, but even to a scandal. Oh, oh! Also I may tell you that Mademoiselle Blanche has been in Roulettenberg before, for she was staying here 3 seasons ago. I myself was in the place at the time, and in those days Mademoiselle Blanche was not known as Mademoiselle de Comminges, nor was her mother, the widow de Comminges, even in existence. In any case, no one ever mentioned the latter. De Griers, too, had not materialized, and I am convinced that not only do the parties stand in no relation to one another, but also they have not long enjoyed one another's acquaintance. Likewise, the Marquisate de Griers is of recent creation. Of that I have reason to be sure, owing to a certain circumstance. Even the name de Griers itself may be taken to be a new invention, seeing that I have a friend who once met the said Marquis under a different name altogether. Yet he possesses a good circle of friends? Possibly. Mademoiselle Blanche also may possess that. Yet it is not 3 years since she received from the local police, at the instance of the Baroness, an invitation to leave the town. And she left it. But why? Well, I must tell you that she first appeared here in company with an Italian, a prince of some sort, a man who bore an historic name, Barberini or something of the kind. The fellow was simply a mass of rings and diamonds, real diamonds too, and the couple used to drive out in a marvellous carriage. At first Mademoiselle de Blanche played 30-40 with fair success, but later her luck took a marked change for the worse. I distinctly remember that in a single evening she lost an enormous sum. But worse was to ensue, for one fine morning her prince disappeared, horses, carriage, and all. Also, the hotel bill which he left unpaid was enormous. Upon this, Mademoiselle Zelma, the name which she assumed after figuring as Madame Barberini, was in despair. She shrieked and howled all over the hotel, and even tore her clothes in her frenzy. In the hotel there was staying also a Polish count. You must know that all travelling Poles are counts, and the spectacle of Mademoiselle Zelma tearing her clothes and, cat-like, scratching her face with her beautiful scented nails produced upon him a strong impression. So the pair had a talk together, and by luncheon time she was consoled. Indeed, that evening the couple entered the casino arm in arm, Mademoiselle Zelma laughing loudly, according to her custom, and showing even more expansiveness in her manners than she had before shown. For instance, she thrust her way into the file of women roulette players in the exact fashion of those ladies who, to clear a space for themselves at the tables, push their fellow players roughly aside. Doubtless you have noticed them? Yes, certainly. Well, they are not worth noticing. To the annoyance of the decent public, they are allowed to remain here. At all events, such of them as daily change 4,000-franc notes at the tables, though, as soon as ever these women cease to do so, they receive an invitation to depart. However, Mademoiselle Zelma continued to change notes of this kind, but her play grew more and more unsuccessful, despite the fact that such ladies' luck is frequently good, for they have a surprising amount of cash at their disposal. Suddenly, the Count too disappeared, even as the Prince had done, and that same evening Mademoiselle Zelma was forced to appear in the casino alone. On this occasion, no one offered her a greeting. 2 days later she had come to the end of her resources. Whereupon, after staking and losing her last louis d'or, she chanced to look around her and saw standing by her side the Baron Burmergelm, who had been eyeing her with fixed disapproval. To his distaste, however, Mademoiselle paid no attention, but turning to him with her well-known smile, requested him to stake on her behalf 10 louis on the red. Later that evening, a complaint from the Baroness led the authorities to request Mademoiselle not to re-enter the casino. If you feel in any way surprised that I should know these petty and unedifying details, the reason is that I had them from a relative of mine who, later that evening, drove Mademoiselle Zelma in his carriage from Roulettenberg to Spa. Now, mark you, Mademoiselle wants to become Madame General, in order that, in future, she may be spared the receipt of such invitations from casino authorities as she received 3 years ago. At present, she is not playing, but that is only because, according to the signs, she is lending money to other players. Yes, that is a much more paying game. I even suspect that the unfortunate general is himself in her debt, as well as perhaps also de Griers. Or it may be that the latter has entered into a partnership with her. Consequently, you yourself will see that, until the marriage shall have been consummated, Mademoiselle would scarcely like to have the attention of the Baron and the Baroness drawn to herself. In short, to anyone in her position, a scandal would be most detrimental. You form a member of the menage of these people. Wherefore any act of yours might cause such a scandal, and the more so since daily she appears in public arm in arm with the general or with Mademoiselle Paulina. Now do you understand? No, I do not, I shouted, as I banged my fist down upon the table. Banged it with such violence that a frightened waiter came running towards us. Tell me, Mr. Astley, why, if you knew this history all along, and consequently always knew who this Mademoiselle Blanche is, you never warned either myself or the general, nor, most of all, Mademoiselle Paulina, who is accustomed to appear in the casino, in public, everywhere with Mademoiselle Blanche. How could you do it? It would have done no good to warn you, he replied quietly, for the reason that you could have effected nothing. Against what was I to warn you? As likely as not, the general knows more about Mademoiselle Blanche even than I do, yet the unhappy man still walks about with her and Mademoiselle Paulina. Only yesterday I saw this Frenchwoman riding, splendidly mounted, with de Griers, while the general was careering in their wake on a roan horse. He had said that morning that his legs were hurting him, yet his riding seat was easy enough. As he passed, I looked at him, and the thought occurred to me that he was a man lost forever. However, it is no affair of mine, for I have only recently had the happiness to make Mademoiselle Paulina's acquaintance. Also, he added this as an afterthought, I have already told you that I do not recognize your right to ask me certain questions, however sincere be my liking for you. Enough, I said, rising. To me it is as clear as day that Mademoiselle Paulina knows all about this Mademoiselle Blanche, but cannot bring herself to part with her Frenchman, wherefore she consents also to be seen in public with Mademoiselle Blanche. You may be sure that nothing else would ever have induced her either to walk about with this Frenchwoman or to send me a note not to touch the Baron. Yes, it is there that the influence lies before which everything in the world must bow, yet she herself it was who launched me at the Baron. The devil take it, but I was left no choice in the matter. You forget, in the first place, that this Mademoiselle de Comminges is the general's inamorata, and, in the second place, that Mademoiselle Paulina, the general's stepdaughter, has a younger brother and sister, who, though they are the general's own children, are completely neglected by this madman, and robbed as well. Yes, that is so. For me to go and desert the children now would mean their total abandonment, whereas, if I remain, I should be able to defend their interests, and perhaps to save a moiety of their property. Yes, that is quite true. And yet, oh, I can well understand why they are all so interested in the general's mother. In whom? Asked Mr. Astley. In the old woman of Moscow who declines to die, yet concerning whom they are forever expecting telegrams to notify the fact of her death. Ah, then of course their interests centre around her. It is a question of succession. Let that but be settled, and the general will marry, Mademoiselle Paulina will be set free, and De Griers— Yes, and De Griers will be repaid his money, which is what he is now waiting for. What? You think that he is waiting for that? I know of nothing else, asserted Mr. Astley doggedly. But I do, I shouted in my fury. He is waiting also for the old woman's will, for the reason that it awards Mademoiselle Paulina a dowry. As soon as ever the money is received, she will throw herself upon the Frenchman's neck. All women are like that. Even the proudest of them become abject slaves where marriage is concerned. What Paulina is good for is to fall head over ears in love. That is my opinion. Look at her, especially when she is sitting alone and plunged in thought. All this was preordained and foretold, and is accursed. Paulina could perpetrate any mad act. She— But who called me by name? I broke off. Who is shouting for me? I heard someone calling in Russian, Alexis Ivanovitch. It was a woman's voice. Listen. At the moment, we were approaching my hotel. We had left the cafe long ago, without even noticing that we had done so. Yes, I did hear a woman's voice calling, but whose I do not know. The someone was calling you in Russian. Ah, now I can see whence the cries come. They come from that lady there, the one who is sitting on the settee, the one who has just been escorted to the veranda by a crowd of lackeys. Behind her, see that pile of luggage. She must have arrived by train. But why should she be calling me? Hear her calling again. See, she's beckoning to us. Yes, so she is, assented Mr. Astley. Alexis Ivanovitch, Alexis Ivanovitch. Good heavens, what a stupid fellow, came in a despairing wail from the veranda. We had almost reached the portico, and I was just setting foot upon the space before it, when my hands fell to my sides in limp astonishment, and my feet glued themselves to the pavement. Deviati. For on the topmost tier of the hotel veranda, after being carried up the steps in an armchair amid a bevy of footmen, maidservants, and other menials of the hotel, headed by the landlord, that functionary had actually run out to meet a visitor who arrived with so much stir and din, attended by her own retinue, and accompanied by so great a pile of trunks and portmanteaux. On the topmost tier of the veranda, I say, there was sitting the grandmother. Yes, it was she, rich and imposing, and 75 years of age. Antonida Vassilievna Tarasevitcha, landowner and grande dame of Moscow, the La Babulenka, who had caused so many telegrams to be sent off and received, who had been dying, yet not dying, who had, in her own person, descended upon us even as snow might fall from the clouds. Though unable to walk, she had arrived borne aloft in an armchair, her mode of conveyance for the last 5 years, as brisk, aggressive, self-satisfied, bolt upright, loudly imperious, and generally abusive as ever. In fact, she looked exactly as she had on the only 2 occasions when I had seen her since my appointment to the general's household. Naturally enough, I stood petrified with astonishment. She had sighted me 100 paces off. Even while she was being carried along in her chair, she had recognized me, and called me by name and surname, which, as usual, after hearing once, she had remembered ever afterwards. And this is the woman whom they had thought to see in her grave after making her will, I thought to myself. Yet she will outlive us, and everyone else in the hotel. Good Lord, what is going to become of us now? What on earth is to happen to the general? She will turn the place upside down. My good sir, the old woman continued in a stentorian voice, what are you standing there for, with your eyes almost falling out of your head? Cannot you come and say, how do you do? Are you too proud to shake hands? Or do you not recognize me? Here, Potapitch, she cried, to an old servant who, dressed in a frock coat and white waistcoat, had a bald red head. He was the chamberlain who always accompanied her on her journeys. Just think, Alexis Ivanovitch does not recognize me. They have buried me for good and all. Yes, and after sending hosts of telegrams to know if I were dead or not. Yes, I have heard the whole story. I am very much alive, though, as you may see. Pardon me, Antonida Vassilievna, I replied good-humouredly as I recovered my presence of mind. I have no reason to wish you ill. I am merely rather astonished to see you. Why should I not be so, seeing how unexpected? Why should you be astonished? I just got into my chair and came. Things are quiet enough in the train, for there is no one there to chatter. Have you been out for a walk? Yes, I have just been to the casino. Oh? Well, it is quite nice here, she went on as she looked about her. The place seems comfortable and all the trees are out. I like it very well. Are your people at home? Is the general, for instance, indoors? Yes, and probably all of them. Do they observe the convenances and keep up appearances? Such things always give one tone. I have heard that they are keeping a carriage, even as Russian gentlefolks ought to do. When abroad, our Russian people always cut a dash. Is Praskovia here too? Yes, Polina Alexandrovna is here. And the Frenchwoman? However, I will go and look for them myself. Tell me the nearest way to their rooms. Do you like being here? Yes, I thank you, Antonida Vassilievna. And you, Potapitch, you go and tell that fool of a landlord to reserve me a suitable suite of rooms. They must be handsomely decorated, and not too high up. Have my luggage taken up to them. But what are you tumbling over yourselves for? Why are you all tearing about? What scullions these fellows are. Who is that with you? She added to myself. A Mr. Astley, I replied. And who is Mr. Astley? A fellow traveller, and my very good friend, as well as an acquaintance of the general's. Oh, an Englishman. Then that is why he stared at me without even opening his lips. However, I like Englishmen. Now, take me upstairs, direct to their rooms. Where are they lodging? Madame was lifted up in her chair by the lackeys, and I preceded her up the grand staircase. Our progress was exceedingly effective, for everyone whom we met stopped to stare at the cortege. It happened that the hotel had the reputation of being the best, the most expensive, and the most aristocratic in all the spa, and at every turn on the staircase or in the corridors we encountered fine ladies and important-looking Englishmen, more than one of whom hastened downstairs to inquire of the awe-struck landlord who the newcomer was. To all such questions he returned the same answer, namely that the old lady was an influential foreigner, a Russian, a countess, and a grande dame, and that she had taken the suite, which, during the previous week, had been tenanted by the Grande Duchesse de N. Meanwhile, the cause of the sensation, the grandmother, was being borne aloft in her armchair. Every person whom she met, she scanned with an inquisitive eye, after first of all interrogating me about him or her at the top of her voice. She was stout of figure, and, though she could not leave her chair, one felt, the moment that one first looked at her, that she was also tall of stature. Her back was as straight as a board, and never did she lean back in her seat. Also, her large grey head, with its keen, rugged features, remained always erect as she glanced about her in an imperious, challenging sort of way, with looks and gestures that clearly were unstudied. Though she had reached her 76th year, her face was still fresh, and her teeth had not decayed. Lastly, she was dressed in a black silk gown and white mobcap. "She interests me tremendously," whispered Mr. Astley, as, still smoking, he walked by my side. Meanwhile, I was reflecting that probably the old lady knew all about the telegrams, and even about De Griers, though little or nothing about Mademoiselle Blanche. I said as much to Mr. Astley. But what a frail creature is man! No sooner was my first surprise abated than I found myself rejoicing in the shock which we were about to administer to the general. So much did the thought inspire me that I marched ahead in the gayest of fashions. Our party was lodging on the 3rd floor. Without knocking at the door or in any way announcing our presence, I threw open the portals, and the grandmother was borne through them in triumph. As though of set purpose, the whole party chanced at that moment to be assembled in the general's study. The time was 11 o'clock, and it seemed that an outing of some sort, at which a portion of the party were to drive in carriages and others to ride on horseback, accompanied by one or two extraneous acquaintances, was being planned. The general was present, and also Paulina, the children, the latter's nurses, De Griers, Mademoiselle Blanche, attired in a riding habit, her mother, the young prince, and a learned German whom I beheld for the first time. Into the midst of this assembly the lackeys conveyed Madame in her chair and set her down within 3 paces of the general. Good heavens, never shall I forget the spectacle which ensued. Just before our entry, the general had been holding forth to the company, with De Griers in support of him. I may also mention that for the last 2 or 3 days, Mademoiselle Blanche and De Griers had been making a great deal of the young prince, under the very nose of the poor general. In short, the company, though decorous and conventional, was in a gay, familiar mood. But no sooner did the grandmother appear than the general stopped dead in the middle of a word, and with jaw dropping, stared hard at the old lady, his eyes almost starting out of his head, and his expression as spellbound as though he had just seen a basilisk. In return, the grandmother stared at him silently, and without moving, though with a look of mingled challenge, triumph, and ridicule in her eyes. For 10 seconds did the pair remain thus eyeing one another amid the profound silence of the company, and even De Griers sat petrified, an extraordinary look of uneasiness dawning on his face. As for Mademoiselle Blanche, she too stared wildly at the grandmother, with eyebrows raised and her lips parted, while the prince and the German savant contemplated the tableau in profound amazement. Only Paulina looked anything but perplexed or surprised. Presently, however, she too turned as white as a sheet, and then reddened to her temples. Truly, the grandmother's arrival seemed to be a catastrophe for everybody. For my own part, I stood looking from the grandmother to the company, and back again, while Mr. Astley, as usual, remained in the background, and gazed calmly and decorously at the scene. Well, here I am. And instead of a telegram, too, the grandmother at last ejaculated, to dissipate the silence. What? You were not expecting me? Antonida Vassilievna! Oh, my dearest mother! But how on earth did you— The mutterings of the unhappy general died away. I verily believe that if the grandmother had held her tongue a few seconds longer, she would have had a stroke. How on earth did I what? She exclaimed. Why, I just got into the train and came here. What else is the railway meant for? But you thought that I had turned up my toes and left my property to the lot of you? Oh, I know all about the telegrams which you have been dispatching. They must have cost you a pretty sum, I should think, for telegrams are not sent from abroad for nothing. Well, I picked up my heels and came here. Who is this Frenchman? Monsieur de Griers, I suppose? Oui, madame, assentait de Griers. Et, croyez, je suis si enchanté. Votre santé, c'est un miracle vous voir ici. Une surprise charmante. Just so. Charmante. I happen to know you as a mountebank, and therefore trust you no more than this. She indicated her little finger. And who is that? She went on, turning towards Mademoiselle Blanche. Evidently the Frenchwoman looked so becoming in her riding habit, with her whip in her hand, that she had made an impression upon the old lady. Who is that woman there? Mademoiselle de Comminges, I said, and this is her mother, Madame de Comminges. They also are staying in the hotel. Is the daughter married? Asked the old lady, without the least semblance of ceremony. No, I replied as respectfully as possible, but under my breath. Is she good company? I failed to understand the question. I mean, is she or is she not a bore? Can she speak Russian? When this De Griers was in Moscow, he soon learnt to make himself understood. I explained to the old lady that Mademoiselle Blanche had never visited Russia. Bonjour, then, said Madame, with sudden brusquerie. Bonjour, Madame, replied Mademoiselle Blanche, with an elegant, ceremonious bow, as, under cover of an unwonted modesty, she endeavoured to express, both in face and figure, her extreme surprise at such strange behaviour on the part of the grandmother. How the woman sticks out her eyes at me! How she mows and minces! Was the grandmother's comment. Then she turned suddenly to the general and continued, I have taken up my abode here, so am going to be your next-door neighbour. Are you glad to hear that, or are you not? My dear mother, believe me when I say that I am sincerely delighted, returned the general, who had now, to a certain extent, recovered his senses, and inasmuch as, when occasion arose, he could speak with fluency, gravity, and a certain effect, he set himself to be expansive in his remarks, and went on. We have been so dismayed and upset by the news of your indisposition. We had received such hopeless telegrams about you. Then suddenly— Fibs, Fibs, interrupted the grandmother. How on earth, too, did you come to decide upon the journey? Continued the general, with raised voice, as he hurried to overlook the old lady's last remark. Surely, at your age, and in your present state of health, the thing is so unexpected that our surprise is at least intelligible. However, I am glad to see you, as indeed are we all. He said this with a dignified yet conciliatory smile, and will use my best endeavours to render your stay here as pleasant as possible. Enough! All this is empty chatter. You are talking the usual nonsense. I shall know quite well how to spend my time. How did I come to undertake the journey, you ask? Well, is there anything so very surprising about it? It was done quite simply. What is everyone going into ecstasies about? How do you do, Praskovia? What are you doing here? And how are you, grandmother? Replied Polina, as she approached the old lady. Were you long on the journey? The most sensible question that I have yet been asked. Well, you shall hear for yourself how it all happened. I lay, and was doctored, until at last I drove the physicians from me, and called in an apothecary from Nikolai, who had cured an old woman of a malady similar to my own, cured her merely with a little hayseed. Well, he did me a great deal of good, for on the third day I broke into a sweat, and was able to leave my bed. Then my German doctors held another consultation, put on their spectacles, and told me that if I would go abroad and take a course of the waters, the indisposition would finally pass away. Why should it not? I thought to myself. So I had got things ready, and on the following day, a Friday, set out for here. I occupied a special compartment in the train, and wherever I had to change, I found at the station-bearers, who were ready to carry me for a few coppers. You have nice quarters here, she went on as she glanced around the room. But where on earth did you get the money for them, my good sir? I thought that everything of yours had been mortgaged. This Frenchman alone must be your creditor for a good deal. Oh, I know all about it, all about it. I am surprised at you, my dearest mother, said the general in some confusion. I am greatly surprised. But I do not need any extraneous control of my finances. Moreover, my expenses do not exceed my income, and they do not exceed it? Fie! Why, you are robbing your children of their last kopeck. You, their guardian. After this, said the general, completely taken aback, after what you have just said, I do not know whether— You do not know what? By heavens, are you never going to drop that roulette of yours? Are you going to whistle all your property away? This made such an impression upon the general that he almost choked with fury. Roulette, indeed? I play roulette? Really, in view of my position, recollect what you are saying, my dearest mother. You must still be unwell. Rubbish, rubbish, she retorted. The truth is that you cannot be got away from that roulette. You are simply telling lies. This very day I mean to go and see for myself what roulette is like. Praskovia, tell me what there is to be seen here. And do you, Alexis Ivanovitch, show me everything. And do you, Potapitch, make me a list of excursions. What is there to be seen? Again she inquired of Polina. There is a ruined castle, and the Schlangenberg. The Schlangenberg? What is it? A forest? No, a mountain on the summit of which there is a place fenced off. From it you can get a most beautiful view. Could a chair be carried up that mountain of yours? Doubtless we could find bearers for the purpose, I interposed. At this moment, Theodosia, the nursemaid, approached the old lady with the general's children. No, I don't want to see them, said the grandmother. I hate kissing children, for their noses are always wet. How are you getting on, Theodosia? I am very well, thank you, madame, replied the nursemaid. And how is your ladyship? We have been feeling so anxious about you. Yes, I know, you simple soul. But who are those other guests? The old lady continued, turning again to Polina. For instance, who is that old rascal in the spectacles? Prince Nilsky, Grandmamma, whispered Polina. Oh, a Russian? Why, I had no idea that he could understand me. Surely he did not hear what I said. As for Mr. Astley, I have seen him already, and I see that he is here again. How do you do? She added to the gentleman in question. Mr. Astley bowed in silence. Have you nothing to say to me? The old lady went on. Say something, for goodness sake. Translate to him, Polina. Polina did so. I have only to say, replied Mr. Astley gravely, but also with alacrity, that I am indeed glad to see you in such good health. This was interpreted to the grandmother, and she seemed much gratified. How well English people know how to answer one, she remarked. That is why I like them so much better than French. Come here, she added to Mr. Astley. I will try not to bore you too much. Polina, translate to him that I am staying in rooms on a lower floor. Yes, on a lower floor, she repeated to Astley, pointing downwards with her finger. Astley looked pleased at receiving the invitation. Next, the old lady scanned Polina from head to foot with minute attention. I could almost have liked you, Praskovia, suddenly she remarked, for you are a nice girl, the best of the lot. You have some character about you. I, too, have character. Turn round. Surely that is not false hair that you are wearing. No, Grandmamma, it is my own. Well, well, I do not like the stupid fashions of today. You are very good-looking. I should have fallen in love with you if I had been a man. Why do you not get married? It is time now that I was going. I want to walk, yet I always have to ride. Are you still in a bad temper? She added to the general. No, indeed, rejoined the now mollified general. I quite understand that at your time of life. Cette vieille est tombée en enfance, de Grieux whispered to me. But I want to look round a little, the old lady added to the general. Will you lend me Alexis Ivanovitch for the purpose? As much as you like. But I myself, yes, and Polina and Monsieur de Grieux too. We all of us hope to have the pleasure of escorting you. Mais madame, cela sera un plaisir, de Grieux commented with a bewitching smile. Plaisir, indeed. Why, I look upon you as a perfect fool, monsieur. Then she remarked to the general, I am not going to let you have any of my money. I must be off to my rooms now to see what they are like. Afterwards we will look round a little. Lift me up. Again the grandmother was borne aloft and carried down the staircase amid a perfect bevy of followers, the general walking as though he had been hit over the head with a cudgel, and de Grieux seeming to be plunged in thought. Endeavouring to be left behind, Mademoiselle Blanche next thought better of it, and followed the rest, with the prince in her wake. Only the German savant and Madame de Comminges did not leave the general's apartments. Patavde. At spas, and probably all over Europe, hotel landlords and managers are guided in their allotment of rooms to visitors, not so much by the wishes and requirements of those visitors as by their personal estimate of the same. It may also be said that these landlords and managers seldom make a mistake. To the grandmother, however, our landlord, for some reason or another, allotted such a sumptuous suite that he fairly overreached himself, for he assigned her a suite consisting of 4 magnificently appointed rooms, with bathroom, servants' quarters, a separate room for her maid, and so on. In fact, during the previous week, the suite had been occupied by no less a personage than a Grand Duchess, which circumstance was duly explained to the new occupant as an excuse for raising the price of these apartments. The grandmother had herself carried, or rather wheeled, through each room in turn, in order that she might subject the whole to a close and attentive scrutiny, while the landlord, an elderly, bald-headed man, walked respectfully by her side. What everyone took the grandmother to be, I do not know, but it appeared, at least, that she was accounted a person not only of great importance, but also, and still more, of great wealth, and without delay they entered her in the hotel register as Madame la Générale, Princesse de Tarasevicheva, although she had never been a princess in her life. Her retinue, her reserved compartment in the train, Her pile of unnecessary trunks, portmanteau, and strong boxes all helped to increase her prestige, while her wheeled chair, her sharp tone and voice, her eccentric questions, put with an air of the most overbearing and unbridled imperiousness, her whole figure, upright, rugged, and commanding as it was, completed the general awe in which she was held. As she inspected her new abode, she ordered her chair to be stopped at intervals in order that, with finger extended towards some article of furniture, she might ply the respectfully smiling, yet secretly apprehensive, landlord with unexpected questions. She addressed them to him in French, although her pronunciation of the language was so bad that sometimes I had to translate them. For the most part, the landlord's answers were unsatisfactory and failed to please her, nor were the questions themselves of a practical nature, but related, generally, to God knows what. For instance, on one occasion she halted before a picture which, a poor copy of a well-known original, had a mythological subject. "Of whom is this a portrait?" she inquired. The landlord explained that it was probably that of a countess. "But how know you that?" the old lady retorted. "You live here, yet you cannot say for certain. And why is the picture there at all? And why do its eyes look so crooked?" To all these questions the landlord could return no satisfactory reply, despite his floundering endeavors. "The blockhead!" exclaimed the grandmother in Russian. Then she proceeded on her way, only to repeat the same story in front of a Saxon statuette which she had sighted from afar and had commanded, for some reason or another, to be brought to her. Finally, she inquired of the landlord what was the value of the carpet in her bedroom, as well as where the said carpet had been manufactured, but the landlord could do no more than promise to make inquiries. "What donkeys these people are," she commented. Next, she turned her attention to the bed. "What a huge counterpane!" she exclaimed. "Turn it back, please." The lackeys did so. "Further yet, further yet," the old lady cried. "Turn it right back. Also, take off those pillows and bolsters, and lift up the feather bed." The bed was opened for her inspection. "Mercifully, it contains no bugs," she remarked. "Pull off the whole thing, and then put on my own pillows and sheets. The place is too luxurious for an old woman like myself. It is too large for any one person. Alexis Ivanovitch, come and see me whenever you are not teaching your pupils." "After tomorrow I shall no longer be in the general's service," I replied, "but merely living in the hotel on my own account." "Why so?" "Because the other day there arrived from Berlin a German and his wife, persons of some importance, and it chanced that when taking a walk I spoke to them in German without having properly compassed the Berlin accent." "Indeed?" "Yes, and this action on my part the Baron held to be an insult, and complained about it to the general, who yesterday dismissed me from his employ. But I suppose you must have threatened that precious Baron, or something of the kind. However, even if you did so, it was a matter of no moment." "No, I did not. The Baron was the aggressor by raising his stick at me." Upon that, the grandmother turned sharply to the general. "What? You permitted yourself to treat your tutor thus, you nincompoop, and to dismiss him from his post? You are a blockhead, an utter blockhead. I can see that clearly." "Do not alarm yourself, my dear mother," the general replied with a lofty air, an air in which there was also a tinge of familiarity. "I am quite capable of managing my own affairs. Moreover, Alexis Ivanovitch has not given you a true account of the matter." "What did you do next?" the old lady inquired of me. "I wanted to challenge the Baron to a duel," I replied as modestly as possible, "but the general protested against my doing so." "And why did you so protest?" she inquired of the general. Then she turned to the landlord and questioned him as to whether he would not have fought a duel if challenged. "For," she added, "I can see no difference between you and the Baron, nor can I bear that German visage of yours." Upon this the landlord bowed and departed, though he could not have understood the grandmother's compliment. "Pardon me, madame," the general continued with a sneer, "but are duels really feasible?" "Why not? All men are crowing cocks, and that is why they quarrel. You, though, I perceive, are a blockhead. A man who does not even know how to carry his breeding. Lift me up. Potter pitch. See to it that you always have 2 bearers ready. Go and arrange for their hire, but we shall not require more than 2, for I shall need only to be carried upstairs. On the level or in the street I can be wheeled along. Go and tell them that, and pay them in advance, so that they may show me some respect. You too, Potapitch, are always to come with me, and you, Alexis Ivanovitch, are to point out to me this baron as we go along, in order that I may get a squint at the precious Von. And where is that roulette played? I explained to her that the game was carried on in the salons of the casino, whereupon there ensued a string of questions as to whether there were many such salons, whether many people played in them, whether those people played a whole day at a time, and whether the game was managed according to fixed rules. At length, I thought it best to say that the most advisable course would be for her to go and see it for herself, since a mere description of it would be a difficult matter. "Then take me straight there," she said, "and do you walk on in front of me, Alexis Ivanovitch." "What, mother? Before you have so much as rested from your journey?" the general inquired with some solicitude. Also, for some reason which I could not divine, he seemed to be growing nervous, and indeed the whole party was evincing signs of confusion and exchanging glances with one another. Probably they were thinking that it would be a ticklish, even an embarrassing business to accompany the grandmother to the casino, where, very likely, she would perpetrate further eccentricities, and in public too. Yet on their own initiative they had offered to escort her. "Why should I rest?" she retorted. "I am not tired, for I have been sitting still these past 5 days. Let us see what your medicinal springs and waters are like, and where they are situated. What, too, about what did you call it? Prascovia? Oh, about that mountain top. Yes, we are going to see it, Grandmamma." "Very well. Is there anything else for me to see here?" "Yes, quite a number of things," Polina forced herself to say. "Martha, you must come with me as well," went on the old lady to her maid. "No, no, mother," ejaculated the general. "Really, she cannot come. They would not admit even Potapitch to the casino." "Rubbish! Because she is my servant, is that a reason for turning her out? Why, she is only a human being like the rest of us, and as she has been traveling for a week, she might like to look about her. With whom else could she go out but myself? She would never dare to show her nose in the street alone." "But, mother, are you ashamed to be seen with me? Stop at home, then, and you will be asked no questions. A pretty general you are, to be sure. I am a general's widow myself. But after all, why should I drag the whole party with me? I will go and see the sights with only Alexis Ivanovitch as my escort." De Griers strongly insisted that everyone ought to accompany her. Indeed, he launched out into a perfect shower of charming phrases concerning the pleasure of acting as her cicerone, and so forth. Everyone was touched with his words. "Mais elle est tombée en enfance," he added, aside to the general. "Seule, elle fera des bêtises." More than this I could not overhear, but he seemed to have got some plan in his mind, or even to be feeling a slight return of his hopes. The distance to the casino was about half a verst, and our route led us through the Chestnut Avenue until we reached the square directly fronting the building. The general, I could see, was a trifle reassured by the fact that, though our progress was distinctly eccentric in its nature, it was, at least, correct and orderly. As a matter of fact, the spectacle of a person who is unable to walk is not anything to excite surprise at a spa. Yet it was clear that the general had a great fear of the casino itself, for why should a person who had lost the use of her limbs, more especially an old woman, be going to rooms which were set apart only for roulette? On either side of the wheeled chair walked Polina and Mademoiselle Blanche, the latter smiling, modestly jesting, and, in short, making herself so agreeable to the grandmother that in the end the old lady relented towards her. On the other side of the chair, Polina had to answer an endless flow of petty questions, such as, "Who was it passed just now? Who is that coming along? Is the town a large one? Are the public gardens extensive? What sort of trees are those? What is the name of those hills? Do I see eagles flying yonder? What is that absurd-looking building? And so forth. Meanwhile, Astley whispered to me, as he walked by my side, that he looked for much to happen that morning. Behind the old lady's chair marched Potapitch and Martha, Potapitch in his frock-coat and white waistcoat, with a cloak over all, and the 40-year-old and rosy, but slightly grey-headed, Martha in a mob-cap, cotton dress, and squeaking shoes. Frequently the old lady would twist herself round to converse with these servants. As for de Griers, he spoke as though he had made up his mind to do something, though it is also possible that he spoke in this manner merely in order to hearten the general, with whom he appeared to have held a conference. But alas, the grandmother had uttered the fatal words, "I am not going to give you any of my money." And though de Griers might regard these words lightly, the general knew his mother better. Also, I noticed that de Griers and Mademoiselle Blanche were still exchanging looks, while of the prince and the German savant I lost sight at the end of the avenue, where they had turned back and left us. Into the casino we marched in triumph. At once, both in the person of the commissionaire and in the persons of the footmen, there sprang to life the same reverence as had arisen in the lackeys of the hotel. Yet it was not without some curiosity that they eyed us. Without loss of time, the grandmother gave orders that she should be wheeled through every room in the establishment, of which apartments she praised a few, while to others she remained indifferent. Concerning everything, however, she asked questions. Finally, we reached the gaming salons, where a lackey who was, acting as guard over the doors, flung them open as though he were a man possessed. The grandmother's entry into the roulette salon produced a profound impression upon the public. Around the tables, and at the further end of the room where the 34 table was set out, there may have been gathered from 150 to 200 gamblers, ranged in several rows. Those who had succeeded in pushing their way to the tables were standing with their feet firmly planted, in order to avoid having to give up their places until they should have finished their game, since merely to stand looking on, thus occupying a gambler's place for nothing, was not permitted. True, chairs were provided around the tables, but few players made use of them, more especially if there was a large attendance of the general public, since to stand allowed of a closer approach, and therefore of greater facilities for calculation and staking. Behind the foremost row were herded a second and a third row of people awaiting their turn, but sometimes their impatience led these people to stretch a hand through the first row in order to deposit their stakes. Even third-row individuals would dart forward to stake, whence seldom did more than 5 or 10 minutes pass without a scene over disputed money arising at one or another end of the table. On the other hand, the police of the casino were an able body of men, and though to escape the crush was an impossibility, however much one might wish it, the 8 croupiers apportioned to each table kept an eye upon the stakes, performed the necessary reckoning, and decided disputes as they arose. In the last resort, they always called in the casino police, and the disputes would immediately come to an end. Policemen were stationed about the casino in ordinary costume and mingled with the spectators, so as to make it impossible to recognize them. In particular, they kept a lookout for pickpockets and swindlers who simply swanned in the roulette salons and reaped a rich harvest. Indeed, in every direction money was being filched from pockets or purses, though, of course, if the attempt miscarried, a great uproar ensued. One had only to approach a roulette table, begin to play, and then openly grab someone else's winnings, for a din to be raised, and the thief to start vociferating that the stake was his. And, if the coup had been carried out with sufficient skill, and the witnesses wavered at all in their testimony, the thief would as likely as not succeed in getting away with the money, provided that the sum was not a large one, not large enough to have attracted the attention of the croupiers or some fellow player. Moreover, if it were a stake of insignificant size, its true owner would sometimes decline to continue the dispute, rather than become involved in a scandal. Conversely, if the thief was detected, he was ignominiously expelled the building. Upon all this the grandmother gazed with open-eyed curiosity, and, on some thieves happening to be turned out of the place, she was delighted. 30 et 40 intéressaient elle mais peu. Elle préférait le roulette, avec son roue qui tourne sans cesse. At length she expressed a wish to view the game closer, Whereupon, in some mysterious manner, the lackeys and other officious agents, especially one or two ruined Poles of the kind who keep offering their services to successful gamblers and foreigners in general, at once found and cleared a space for the old lady among the crush, at the very centre of one of the tables, and next to the chief croupier, after which they wheeled her chair thither. Upon this, a number of visitors who were not playing, but only looking on, particularly some Englishmen with their families, pressed closer forward towards the table in order to watch the old lady from among the ranks of the gamblers. Many a lorgnette, I saw, turned in her direction, and the croupier's hopes rose high that such an eccentric player was about to provide them with something out of the common. An old lady of 75 years who, though unable to walk, desired to play was not an everyday phenomenon. I too pressed forward towards the table and ranged myself by the grandmother's side, while Martha and Potapitch remained somewhere in the background among the crowd, and the general, Paulina, and de Griers, with Mademoiselle Blanche, also remained hidden among the spectators. At first, the old lady did no more than watch the gamblers and ply me, in a half-whisper, with sharp broken questions as to who was so-and-so. Especially did her favour light upon a very young man who was plunging heavily and had won, so it was whispered, as much as 40,000 francs, which were lying before him on the table in a heap of gold and banknotes. His eyes kept flashing and his hands shaking. Yet all the while he staked without any sort of calculation, just what came to his hand, as he kept winning and raking in his gains. Around him lackeys fussed, placing chairs just behind where he was standing, and clearing the spectators from his vicinity, so that he should have more room and not be crowded, the whole done, of course, in expectation of a generous largesse. From time to time other gamblers would hand him part of their winnings, being glad to let him stake for them as much as his hand could grasp, while beside him stood a Pole in a state of violent but respectful agitation, who, also in expectation of a generous largesse, kept whispering to him at intervals, probably telling him what to stake and advising and directing his play. Yet never once did the player throw him a glance as he staked and raked in his winnings. Evidently, the player in question was dead to all besides. For a few minutes the grandmother watched him. "Go and tell him," suddenly she exclaimed with a nudge at my elbow. "Go and tell him to stop, and to take his money with him and go home. Presently he will be losing, yes, losing everything that he has now won." She seemed almost breathless with excitement. "Where is Potapitch?" she continued. "Send Potapitch to speak to him. No, you must tell him, you must tell him." Here she nudged me again, for I have not the least notion where Potapitch is. "Sortes, sortes," she shouted to the young man, until I leant over in her direction and whispered in her ear that no shouting was allowed, nor even loud speaking, since to do so disturbed the calculations of the players and might lead to our being ejected. "How provoking," she retorted. "Then the young man is done for. I suppose he wishes to be ruined, yet I could not bear to see him have to return it all. What a fool the fellow is." And the old lady turned sharply away. On the left, among the players at the other half of the table, a young lady was playing, with, beside her, a dwarf. Who the dwarf may have been, whether a relative or a person whom she took with her to act as a foil, I do not know, but I had noticed her there on previous occasions, since every day she entered the casino at 1 o'clock precisely and departed at 2, thus playing for exactly 1 hour. Being well known to the attendants, she always had a seat provided for her, and taking some gold and a few 1,000-franc notes out of her pocket, would begin quietly, coldly, and after much calculation, to stake and mark down the figures in pencil on a paper, as though striving to work out a system according to which, at given moments, the odds might group themselves. Always she staked large coins, and either lost or won 1, 2, or 3,000 francs a day, but not more, after which she would depart. The grandmother took a long look at her. "That woman is not losing," she said. "To whom does she belong? Do you know her? Who is she?" "She is, I believe, a Frenchwoman," I replied. "Ah, a bird of passage, evidently. Besides, I can see that she has her shoes polished. Now, explain to me the meaning of each round in the game and the way in which one ought to stake. Upon this, I set myself to explain the meaning of all the combinations of rouge et noir, of pair et impair, of manque et passe, with, lastly, the different values in the system of numbers. The grandmother listened attentively, took notes, put questions in various forms, and laid the whole thing to heart. Indeed, since an example of each system of stakes kept constantly occurring, a great deal of information could be assimilated with ease and celerity. The grandmother was vastly pleased. "But what is zero?" she inquired. "Just now I heard the flaxen-haired croupier call out, 'Zero.' And why does he keep raking in all the money that is on the table? To think that he should grab the whole pile for himself. What does zero mean?" "Zero is what the bank takes for itself. If the wheel stops at that figure, everything lying on the table becomes the absolute property of the bank. Also, whenever the wheel has begun to turn, the bank ceases to pay out anything." "Then I should receive nothing if I were staking?" "No, unless by any chance you had purposely staked on zero, in which case you would receive 35 times the value of your stake." "Why 35 times, when zero so often turns up? And if so, why do not more of these fools stake upon it?" "Because the number of chances against its occurrence is 36. "Rubbish! Potapitch! Potapitch! Come here, and I will give you some money." The old lady took out of her pocket a tightly clasped purse and extracted from its depths a 10-gulden piece. "Go at once and stake that upon zero." "But, madame, zero has only this moment turned up," I remonstrated. "Wherefore, it may not do so again for ever so long. Wait a little, and you may then have a better chance." "Rubbish! Stake, please." "Pardon me, but zero might not turn up again until, say, tonight, even though you had staked thousands upon it. It often happens so." "Rubbish, rubbish. Who fears the wolf should never enter the forest? What? We have lost? Then stake again." A second 10-gulden piece did we lose, and then I put down a third. The grandmother could scarcely remain seated in her chair, so intent was she upon the little ball as it leapt through the notches of the ever-revolving wheel. However, the third 10-gulden piece followed the first two. Upon this the grandmother went perfectly crazy. She could no longer sit still, and actually struck the table with her fist when the croupier cried out, "26," instead of the desiderated zero. "To listen to him," fumed the old lady. "When will that accursed zero ever turn up? I cannot breathe until I see it. I believe that infernal croupier is purposely keeping it from turning up. Alexis Ivanovitch, stake 2 golden pieces this time. The moment we cease to stake, that cursed zero will come turning up, and we shall get nothing." "My good madame." "Stake! Stake! It is not your money." Accordingly, I staked 2 10-gulden pieces. The ball went hopping round the wheel until it began to settle through the notches. Meanwhile, the grandmother sat as though petrified, with my hand convulsively clutched in hers. "Zero!" called the croupier. "There! You see! You see!" cried the old lady, as she turned and faced me, wreathed in smiles. "I told you so. It was the Lord God himself who suggested to me to stake those 2 coins. Now, how much ought I to receive? Why do they not pay it out to me? Potapitch, Martha, where are they? What has become of our party? Potapitch, Potapitch." "Presently, madame," I whispered. "Potapitch is outside, and they would decline to admit him to these rooms. See, you are being paid out your money. Pray take it." The croupiers were making up a heavy packet of coins, sealed in blue paper and containing 50 10-gulden pieces, together with an unsealed packet containing another 20. I handed the whole to the old lady in a money shovel. "Faites le jeu, messieurs! Faites le jeu, messieurs! Rien ne va plus," proclaimed the croupier, as once more he invited the company to stake and prepared to turn the wheel. "We shall be too late. He's going to spin again. Stake! Stake!" The grandmother was in a perfect fever. "Do not hang back. Be quick." She seemed almost beside herself and nudged me as hard as she could. "Upon what shall I stake, madame?" Upon zero, upon zero, again upon zero. Stake as much as ever you can. How much have we got? 70 10 gulden pieces. We shall not miss them, so stake 20 pieces at a time. Think a moment, madame. Sometimes zero does not turn up for 200 rounds in succession. I assure you that you may lose all your capital. You are wrong, utterly wrong. Stake, I tell you. What a chattering tongue you have. I know perfectly well what I am doing. The old lady was shaking with excitement. But the rules do not allow of more than 120 gulden being staked upon zero at a time. How do not allow? Surely you are wrong? Monsieur, monsieur. Here she nudged the croupier, who was sitting on her left and preparing to spin. Combien? Zero? Douze? Douze? I hastened to translate. Oui, madame, was the croupier's polite reply. No single stake must exceed 4,000 florins. That is the regulation. Then there is nothing else for it. We must risk in gulden. Le jeu est fait, the croupier called. The wheel revolved and stopped at 30. We had lost. Again, again, again! Stake again! Shouted the old lady. Without attempting to oppose her further, but merely shrugging my shoulders, I placed 12 more 10 gulden pieces upon the table. The wheel whirled around and around, with the grandmother simply quaking as she watched its revolutions. Does she again think that zero is going to be the winning coup, thought I, as I stared at her in astonishment. Yet an absolute assurance of winning was shining on her face. She looked perfectly convinced that zero was about to be called again. At length, the ball dropped off into one of the notches. Zero! Cried the croupier. Ah! Screamed the old lady as she turned to me in a whirl of triumph. I myself was at heart a gambler. At that moment I became acutely conscious both of that fact and of the fact that my hands and knees were shaking and that the blood was beating in my brain. Of course, this was a rare occasion, an occasion on which zero had turned up no less than 3 times within a dozen rounds. Yet in such an event there was nothing so very surprising, seeing that, only 3 days ago, I myself had been a witness to zero turning up 3 times in succession, so that one of the players who was recording the coups on paper was moved to remark that for several days past zero had never turned up at all. With the grandmother, as with anyone who has won a very large sum, the management settled up with great attention and respect, since she was fortunate to have to receive no less than 4,200 gulden. Of these gulden, the odd 200 were paid her in gold and the remainder in banknotes. This time the old lady did not call for potapitch. For that she was too preoccupied. Though not outwardly shaken by the event, indeed, she seemed perfectly calm, she was trembling inwardly from head to foot. At length, completely absorbed in the game, she burst out, Alexis Ivanovitch, did not the croupier just say that 4,000 florins were the most that could be staked at any one time? Well, take these 4,000 and stake them upon the red. To oppose her was useless. Once more the wheel revolved. Rouge! Proclaimed the croupier. Again 4,000 florins, in all 8,000. Give me them, commanded the grandmother, and stake the other 4,000 upon the red again. I did so. Rouge! Proclaimed the croupier. 12,000, cried the old lady. Hand me the whole lot. Put the gold into this purse here and count the banknotes. Enough. Let us go home. Wheel my chair away.